Tony Stark just caged Superman using kryptonite, but at what terrifying cost? I had to do it. There was no other way. But the cost was his soul. What have I become? What if Iron Man built a kryptonite suit that can actually beat Superman?
The thunder cracked like the end of the world itself across the shattered skyline of Metropolis, where twisted steel beams jutted from collapsed towers like broken bones, and the rain hammered down in relentless sheets, turning the streets into rivers of debris and shattered glass, while Tony Stark hovered motionless inside the Mark K armor, its entire exoskeleton pulsing with a sickly emerald radiance that seemed to poison the very atmosphere around him, the synthetic kryptonite core buried deep in the chest plate throbbing with raw lethal power that made the suit feel alive in a way the old arc reactor never had, sending waves of green energy through every reinforced joint, every nanotech layer, and every kinetic shield calibrated to absorb the kind of punishment only a god could deliver. And there, floating 30 meters opposite him, was Superman. The Man of Steel, his once invincible frame now trembling ever so slightly under the invisible aura of weakening radiation leaking from the suit, his cape whipping wildly in the storm, his eyes, which had burned with the fury of 1,000 suns, now flickering with something raw and human, a mix of betrayal and dawning horror, because this was not the Tony Stark he had fought beside in the old alliances. This was a man who had crossed every line to become the warden of a planet that no longer trusted its protector. The air between them, so thick it felt like it could snap at any second, and Tony could feel the suit's systems fighting to contain the radiation that powered everything from the repulsors glowing with concentrated green bursts designed to deplete Kryptonian cells on impact, to the lead-lined plating that blocked those piercing X-ray gazes, and the heat vision capable of carving through mountains, his mind racing back through the sleepless nights in the hidden Stark lab, where the ethical shift had begun, not as a moment of madness, but as a slow, creeping realization after the latest global crisis, when Superman had moved too fast, too decisively, leaving cities in rubble and governments in panic, demanding someone mortal, someone brilliant enough to contain a being who could level continents with a glance. And Tony had stared at the fragments of that long-forgotten meteor, the one laced with pure kryptonite, the substance that turned the god into something almost mortal, and in that moment, the billionaire genius, who once powered his suits with clean blue energy, had made the choice to forge something darker, trading the arc reactor for a stabilized synthetic furnace that hummed with controlled death, projecting a localized weakening field, while protecting the pilot inside through layered containment shields. And as the first prototypes came online, he had tested the kinetic shielding against simulated blows that mirrored the force of a Kryptonian punch, the vibranium steel alloy reinforced with nanites that could repair themselves mid-battle, absorbing impacts that would have pulverized lesser armors. And now, here in the heart of this cataclysmic standoff, Tony felt the weight of it all, the moral civil war raging inside his own skull, because this suit, this Mark K, was not built for glory or heroism. It was engineered for one purpose: containment, the ultimate anti-god protocol that could force a stalemate or worse if the core ever breached, unleashing radiation that would scar the city for generations. And Superman charged. Then, not with his usual blur of speed, but with a deliberate, powerful surge, as if testing the limits of this new threat, his fist cutting through the rain like a comet. And Tony braced, the suit's stabilizers kicking in, automatically matching the supersonic trajectory, with flight patterns tuned from countless hours of data on Kryptonian atmospheric maneuvers, the repulsors flaring brighter as the first blow connected a thunderous impact that sent shockwaves rippling outward, shattering what remained of the nearby windows, and for a split second the world seemed to hold its breath as the Mark K held firm, the emerald core surging to counteract the force, draining just a fraction more power into the weakening aura that clawed at Superman's strength, making his muscles burn with an unfamiliar fatigue, the kind that no solar charge could replenish fast enough. And Tony's voice echoed inside the helmet, low and strained with the kind of raw emotion that came from knowing he was about to bleed a legend. Dry Friday, full power to the green light emitters. We end this before the whole damn planet pays for our mistakes. And the AI responded with her usual precision. But there was an undercurrent of something almost like concern in her synthesized tone, warning that the core's stability was holding at 98%. But any escalation could risk catastrophic fallout. Yet Tony pushed forward, the nanotech swarms deploying in microbursts, laced with aerosolized kryptonite dust that hung in the air like invisible poison ready to infiltrate and suppress from within, while the suit's sensors locked onto every solar radiation signature, tracing the hero's weakening power levels in real time. And as Superman reeled from the first exchange his heat vision, lancing out in a desperate counter, only to be deflected by the specialized plating that turned the searing beams into harmless glows. Tony felt the double hook of destiny tightening around them both. Because this confrontation was not just about power, it was about the shattering of trust between mortals and gods, the Avengers who would see this as betrayal, and the Justice League that would brand him a villain for daring to build a weapon that could execute the protector of the people, the emerald glow intensifying. As the suit maneuvered with precision that defied physics using stabilizers, honed from years of Iron Man evolution, now amplified by this forbidden fusion. And Superman's roar cut through the storm, a sound filled with pain and fury that echoed off the crumbling buildings, carrying the weight of every life he had saved, every battle he had won, only to face this engineered nightmare born from the mind of a man who once called him friend. The rain continued, its merciless assault mingling with the faint green haze that now surrounded the Kryptonian like a shroud, slowly sapping the infinite reservoir of strength that had defined him for so long. While Tony hovered there, heart pounding with the realization that this suit, the pinnacle of his 2020 genius, might just be the key to planetary survival, or the spark that ignites a war no one could win. And in that frozen heartbeat between blows, with a city burning below and the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance, the Mark K's core pulsed brighter, daring the Man of Steel to come closer, to test whether mortal ingenuity could truly contain a god, or if this emerald heart of destruction would consume them both in its radioactive embrace, the tension building like a storm about to break the slow, deliberate pacing of their movements, each calculating the next strike, knowing that one misstep, one breach in the containment field could end everything, not with glory, but with ashes and regret. The emerald glow emanating from the Mark K suit flashed, bright as Superman's second charge tore forward like a living missile that sliced through the deluge of water created by his cape, flapping furiously at the edges, thanks to the sheer velocity of his attack. Meanwhile, the systems of Tony Stark were screaming overload alerts in his helmet as the kinetic shields absorbed the godlike power of the hit and quaked with the impact that had enough potential to crush mountains, because this was not just any regular armor that he had created. Rather, this suit was the result of months of illegal engineering work that had taken Tony Stark in darker shades of gray morality than ever before, and had left him confined within an underground bunker far beneath the ruins of an old Avengers facility, surrounded by green-hued holograms and streams of toxic-looking data. It was from there that he had meticulously synthesized the core of this green energy suit that used the deadly material called kryptonite, obtained through backdoor channels of black markets, which involved the transition from a blue arc reactor to the stabilized form of radioactive power that was capable of emitting green waves of energy strong enough to cause a localized weakening aura that could deplete the solar-powered cells of any Kryptonian individual, and contained safely through multiple layers of field-based defenses to protect Tony's life within his exoskeleton. Now, in the middle of this disaster, the green light repulsors of the suit fired blasts that stabbed Superman's chest and drained his powers, further causing his movements to become slightly sluggish, since flying now required noticeable effort. And, as he twisted midair trying to dodge another volley, the two clashed again and sent another building tumbling down with a shockwave that caused debris to explode from the structure in slow motion. It was then that the memories of Tony came flooding back to him from the night when he had decided to take the path of no return by engineering such a suit in the first place. He remembered being alone in a dark room while analyzing footage of the last time Superman saved the Earth from one of its many near-death threats, only to sacrifice half a block of a city in doing so. Governments of the planet could no longer overlook the need for a planetary guardian. But even the genius of Tony Stark had crossed that line by designing Mark K not as a weapon for conquering Kryptonians, but the ultimate containment protocol to make sure that a stalemate occurred as opposed to execution. However, the thin line between the two concepts was starting to blur rapidly as the AI voice of Friday continued delivering updates. Core stability at 92% and minimal leakage, but increasing rapidly. The psychological burden that followed weighed upon Tony heavily, as if someone had pressed 1,000 pounds on him, since this was Clark Kent, the very person whom he had shared battles with and had learned to respect. Now, that same person was struggling against the nightmare of a creation brought forth by mortal fear. The rain beat against the visor of the suit, leaving streaks of green vapor as the nanotech swarms were deployed to unleash green cloudbursts in controlled waves that infiltrated Superman's pores and muscles, draining them of their power, making it necessary for him to not just struggle against the suit, but against his body as well. Flying through the sky with precision, Tony managed to maneuver the Mark K by predicting his moves, using algorithms based on years of data on Kryptonian flights patterns, while the lead-lined plates deflected the intense blast of heat vision that would have easily melted most metals into slag, whereas the suit retaliated with kryptonite-laced missiles that exploded in precise pinpoint bursts around the Kryptonian's body to weaken his solar-powered suit armor further, eliciting painful groans filled with betrayal. The showdown that was happening between the two figures destroyed far more than just buildings. It broke the trust that existed between the members of Avengers and Justice League, proving that even after surviving Thanos and Darkseid, they could fall apart at the hands of one man preparing for the day when a god might have to fall from grace. As the kryptonite core of Mark K started pumping power into the weakening aura surrounding the figure, it began to glow brighter, slowly sapping the speed and power of the Man of Steel with each passing second, resulting in punches that felt like swinging through molasses. While Superman's eyes, which normally shone brightly with righteousness, started looking dim due to exhaustion and something much worse. He locked eyes with the armored version of Tony as the emerald core of Mark K became hotter. If there was any breach in the core here, then all of Metropolis would be poisoned for decades by the lethal radiation that would seep through, turning it from a beacon of hope to a toxic wasteland. But Tony couldn't stop since his suit had picked up on Superman's desperate attempt to recharge his depleted cells through the sunlight that managed to pierce through the stormy clouds. Escalation was required. Thus, the nanites of Mark K switched their configuration to reinforce their joints and boost the repulsors of the suit. Preparing for the next round, as Tony announced, "This isn't personal, Clark, but the world cannot continue betting its life on the perfection of yours for as long. One wrong move, one moment of rage and cities burn. I've built this suit to ensure that does not happen," his words hanging heavy between them as Superman delivered a powerful uppercut that resulted in a crack in the Mark K's outer shell. Sparks and green vapor exploded with this impact as Tony's teeth rattled within the suit and the sensors went into emergency repair mode, while the kryptonite furnace within compensated for the loss of power through the suit by feeding it extra energy to perform automated maneuvers, spinning it around rapidly in a blinding display of evasive turns as green blasts were released continuously, hitting Superman and forcing his body to leave weak after images behind in the rain. The shockwave from Superman, as uppercut punched through the Mark K armor like a geological fault, sending hairline cracks running across the outer plating, and, as Tony felt blood on his lips, he saw his teeth being rattled in their sockets as the impact blurred his vision, and yet the Mark K suit refused to give way. The suit's vibranium steel alloy strained under the immense strain inflicted by the godlike strength, the emerald core thrumming with life, and pouring waves of kryptonite radiation into every joint. The green light, repulsors blazing even brighter than before, and they compensated for the blow, blasting Superman back with an energy burst that attacked the Kryptonian cells the same way as acid eats steel. The Man of Steel was staggering back through the curtains of rain, his body looking visibly weaker, his muscles tired like he had never felt before. It seemed as though Superman was unable to get enough yellow sunlight to replenish his strength as he was breathing heavily through his nostrils, drawing more of that green poison into his lungs with every intake as though every breath was becoming harder. And Tony knew exactly how heavy was the toll that being in the Mark K suit was taking on his psyche, because, at that point, he was far from that brilliant inventor who joked away the threat of destruction. 6 months ago, during the darkest of nights, global intelligence had reported a new nightmare scenario. A rogue Kryptonian who could annihilate an entire nation with one thought. And Tony knew that there would be nothing that his arc reactor's clean blue energy could do to prevent the disaster, so he had set to work, creating the transition. The synthetic furnace containing kryptonite radiation was built inside, a multi-layered field of quantum containment that protected the suit. Pilot, while projecting the weakening effect outward like an invisible noose tightening around the neck of that last son of Krypton. He was able to build a sophisticated system of sensors that would detect the sun's radiation signature in real time and transmit that data to Friday's processing matrix to help it predict the enemy's movements and even every flicker of super speed. And now, as he looked down upon the ruins of the city below him, Tony felt his moral civil war ripping apart his soul. Because that Marquet was much more dangerous than whatever the old Hulkbusters and Godkiller prototypes could do. This suit was designed not to end Superman's life, but to keep him alive indefinitely, trapping the god inside a perpetual stalemate where even one wrong move would cause radiation fallout that might poison the entire city. And there was absolutely nothing else that Tony could do since Superman's blue eyes were locked with Tony's through the visor, showing a look of raw betrayal and sorrow. He heard the words in the hero's voice carried to him by the wind. "Tony, why have you done this? I have given everything to protect this world and you make my only weakness into a prison." It was like another punch delivered to his stomach. And, at the same time, it gave him a realization of what would happen if this emerald core was ever breached. The poison would contaminate the groundwater and turn that part of Metropolis into a glowing cemetery for centuries to come. However, Tony was a genius, and, therefore, was not able to listen to those doubts and flooded the suit system with extra power, activating the flight stabilizers as Mark K caught Superman's next supersonic charge in an automated maneuver created out of thousands of simulated dogfights. The reinforced plating absorbed the heat vision attack right in the chest and deflected the attack safely, while nanotechnology swarm was deployed in a shimmering cloud unleashing kryptonite missiles, striking at Superman's armor and causing another scream of pain that was heard in the distant buildings as Superman fell back into the city. The battle was going on for quite a while with deliberate slowness, as each clash was meticulously timed and choreographed, as it should be during such a battle of mortal wit against fading divinity, with the rain beating down like the rain of punishment itself, while the green haze of kryptonite was now surrounding Superman like a second cape, slowly sucking out that infinite power supply he once had for decades. His movements had become noticeably slower as the weakening aura had started exerting the pressure equal to the weight of tons, and Tony could feel his heart pounding against the quantum containment shield, hearing the hum of the lethal precision in the Mark K's systems, while the emerald core became more heated with each passing second. Friday's voice cut through the helmet as she tried to talk some sense into her master. Core integrity at 87%, radiation leak rising rapidly. Recommend tactical withdrawal before exceeding urban contamination thresholds. However, Tony ignored her warning, pushing the Mark K suit farther into the eye of that storm and activating his speakers again as he spoke to Superman. "Clark, you were never supposed to be perfect. None of us are. But when the world looks up and sees a god who can destroy it with just a glance, they need some insurance. They need me, and this suit is that insurance." Those words hung between the opponents for a little while as Superman answered with a powerful uppercut that shattered the Mark K's shoulder joint, making Tony spin away through the air until stabilizers readjusted and Emerald Core compensated for the strain instantly, as it rerouted extra power into green light emitters and bombarded Superman with continuous waves that sent him smashing through one crumbling tower to another. They clashed again as their movements slowed down even more, as the confrontation took a primitive level with the storm roaring around them, as the city was groaning in its death throes. But the tension kept getting higher, the slow, deliberate dance of the two beings whose moves predicted the next fatal strike, and the balance of powers hinged on an incredibly fine line because one more pulse from the core would either totally neutralize the god or leave them broken together, wondering if genius bred from fear has saved the planet or doomed it to a darker age of suspicion and radioactive regret. The emerald core of the Mark K radiated a venomous pulse in perfect synchronicity with the rumbling thunder that rolled overhead as the Metropolis skyline lay in smoldering ruins, and a continuous stream of torrential rain mirrored the ominous green glow that filled the night skies. Tony Stark could feel the slightest twitch of the nanotech repair protocols, fixing his shredded shoulder from the previous blow delivered by the last son of Krypton as the vibranium steel alloy melded back together with a low hiss of superheated metal, while the artificial kryptonite core nestled inside his chest grew hotter and injected just enough radiation into the containment fields to sustain the weakening aura around the hero hovering 20 meters away. his massive form framed by the fury of the storm tattered, cape trailing behind him and muscles carved by asteroid fights, now trembling with the slow, insidious process of cell death, the type that even the brightest solar flares couldn't restore. Because this was the beauty of the engineering project that Tony had undertaken during countless days locked up in his secret underground forge, where holographic projections showed millions of simulations for the reaction of Kryptonian physiology to kryptonite. The emerald energy didn't simply debilitate it, weakened the cells from the inside, out rendering him vulnerable and mortal as the two titans danced in perfect arcs of agony. The flight stabilizers whirred with flawless predictive algorithms anticipating every move of the Man of Steel, while Tony recalled the technical intricacies that he had worked out during the many sleepless nights in the forge. The kinetic energy analysis for a single punch of Superman's calibrated against the reinforced layers of the exoskeletal armor capable of absorbing forces surpassing 100 gigatons of force. The switch from the old arc reactor to this radioactive device had taken months of complex quantum stability procedures, including multiple containment shields that protected the pilot from the deadly radiation and allowed it to be projected around Superman in a field of invisible death. And now, in the midst of this climactic moment, the suit's sensors fed streams of data into his helmet with Friday's cool voice, reporting the critical information. The solar radiation signatures were dropping 23% in the target recommend escalation of aerosol deployment before regenerating cellular thresholds. But Tony hesitated to press the button, knowing that this wasn't some random villain. This was Clark Kent, one of the most iconic figures of hope, who had stood side by side against alien invasions, and the moral civil war raging inside his own skull threatened to drown out the logic of this weapon designed specifically to take down gods. Because did creating this ultimate anti-god protocol really make him a superhero, or the creator of a new era of terror where mortals dared to chain divinity? The rain fell heavily on the Marquet's plating, and the faint green mist leaking out of the suit mixed in with the water as Superman charged towards him with a heavy and powerful swing, his fist slicing through the rain and meeting the resistance of the suit's kinetic shielding that flared emerald in response, causing shock waves to ripple outwards, shattering the rest of the elevated highway and raining concrete into the already flooded streets below. Tony could feel the force of the blow absorbed by the armor and the core responding instantly, rerouting the energy to the green light repulsors and unleashing a sustained attack against the weakened Man of Steel. Concentrated bursts of radioactive energy tearing into Superman's torso like poisoned lightning, each hit reducing his solar power, further causing him to pause and cough violently, taking more aerosolized kryptonite into his lungs, with the nanotech swarm already deployed forming a haze around his body, turning the air into a weapon. The lead-lined plating on the Mark K resisted Superman's heat vision, the bright beam of white light burning the reinforced chest armor, only to fade away as harmless steam after the briefest of moments. And Tony used the flight stabilizers for his own maneuverability, spinning the armor through a series of evasive maneuvers that relied on years' worth of atmospheric pattern recognition from past battles, as the Mark K's core pulsed with energy and released the weakening aura, causing Superman's body to visibly sag with chains of weakness, the fight dragging slowly into a stalemate with every blow and clash heavy with emotional significance. And in this moment, where the two titans stood alone among the crumbling skyline and howling wind, Tony opened up the suit's external audio system, his voice dripping with conflict and pain. "Clark, listen to me. This isn't about fear, this is about survival. The world has changed since the good old days. One moment of doubt, one surge that you can't control, and everything that we protect gets reduced to ashes. I've built this Marquet to ensure that this never happens for us both." Trying to end your existence, but to create an unbreakable containment protocol for the impossible. The words hung in the air, thick with betrayal, because their duel had already split the Avengers from the Justice League and left both parties staring down the barrels of the greatest threat in the history of superheroes as Superman roared in defiance and sorrow, launching himself through the green mist, each punch now heavy with desperate power, his flight pattern disrupted and faltering, and the battle progressed at an agonizingly slow pace, every blow a symphony of emotion and pain, the whole city quivering beneath them, witnessing a duel of mortal ingenuity against divine immortality. The Mark K's systems working at 81% core stability, but showing early signs of radiation bleed. and risking the whole district becoming radioactive for decades to come. Yet still, Tony Stark pushed the machine to its absolute limit, feeding energy into the system's green light emitters, charging for another volley, while nanotech micro-missiles spiraled outward in intricate formations, each filled with kryptonite shards that detonated around the hero, causing him to pause for a second, each explosion bringing a flinch and disrupting his previously flawless flight pattern. And in the climax of the storm, when the lightning forked overhead, illuminating the two titans locked in this deadly dance, Tony Stark felt the full catastrophic potential of his creation. Because this Mark K Kryptonite-powered masterpiece of 2026 technology was no longer a simple suit, it became a fulcrum upon which the power balance between gods and men now rested. One more blow, one final breach of the Kryptonian power levels, and all would be decided for good. This confrontation could either mean saving humanity or condemning them to a new age of suspicion, where the brightest heroes needed to be chained down, because this suit, with the Emerald Core and all its terrifying promise, dared Superman to try harder, dared him to prove that the Man of Steel still had the upper hand in this deadly confrontation, the tension growing like a wave of pressure ready to explode as the two of them circled and clashed, each movement, each breath heavy with the knowledge that this emerald-forged nightmare could very well bring them into a new era of uncertainty and fear, or redeem humanity from it in its entirety. The Emerald Core at the center of the Mark K beat with the livid promise of a curse, a living one trapped in the chest armor of the suit, as Superman forged his way through the toxic cloud of his gargantuan silhouette, cutting a jagged path through the rain and debris that choked the atmosphere of the dying city. The hero's godlike speed brought low to a deliberate surge that told of muscles protesting against invisible radiation chains binding every muscle fiber of his body, while Tony Stark observed the readouts in the visor in grim horror, the solar radiation signatures falling 18% more as Friday's calm. Computer voice issued warnings, core stability at 76%, but aerosol saturation at critical levels in the target area. Deployment risks of permanent pulmonary scarring. But Tony Stark knew that he could not retreat from this challenge, because the world now demanded that mortals serve as warden against the very gods they once worshipped. While the layers of nanotechnology worked furiously to repair yet another crack, this time caused by the Superman's haymaker, while the vibranium steel armor of the Mark K exosuit fought with incredible efficiency against the kinetic force, which would have rendered any other suit into scrap metal within moments. This was Tony Stark's crowning achievement of 2026, the technological solution to a technical problem of immense proportions, the analysis of how many gigatons went into each haymaker that Kryptonians could produce, and the subsequent reinforcement of the alloy lattice with nanites able to redistribute the kinetic energy to keep it at manageable levels. But now that the two enemies were at it again and sending waves of shock through the surrounding area, crumbling a distant bridge into the floodwaters below, Tony Stark felt the psychological burden that weighed heavier than his mechanical armor. As he was forced to recall how this project came into being, it was not hate-driven but a product of the fear of being left powerless while the superhuman was fighting against cosmic forces, leaving collateral damage that was making governments scream for accountability while the heroes were falling apart due to the cracks of power and vulnerability. And Tony Stark's fear became the driving force of the hidden forge that had turned the arc reactor into a stabilized kryptonite furnace, the Emerald Core pumping out controlled apocalypse in the form of a green, weakening aura that kept everyone at bay, thanks to the containment fields protecting the pilot of the suit from its very poison. And now the emerald light of the repulsors lashed out, firing concentrated beams of aerosolized green radiation that slammed into the Superman's torso, causing a visible flinch that was accompanied by gasping sounds as the poison took its toll, infiltrating Superman's lungs, making the breathing process a fight for his life. While Tony Stark maneuvered with surgical precision, the stabilization system performed flawless countermaneuvers, anticipating Superman's moves based on predictive matrices of thousands of hours of observation and analysis of Kryptonian flight mechanics and patterns. The lead-plated suit absorbed the heat vision laser shot and sent it up into the sky, dissolving in a cloud of steaming vapor, while the battle played out as a dance of heartbreak in an excruciatingly slow pace, with every move sending the clock ticks echoing in the air as buildings crumbled all around the two combatants, adding to the cacophony of destruction produced by a storm raging mercilessly in the midst of the dying city, as the rain fell in torrents, mixing with the green radiation cloud that now enveloped the Man of Steel like a second skin. taking the infinite reserves of his powers and draining them bit by bit, making the invincible superhuman experience mortality in a new way as the storm continued battering him down and dragging him to the ground, while Tony Stark's external speakers crackled to life, allowing his voice to be heard, raw from years of frustration and pain. "Clark, you need to understand that this is how it has to be. Our world cannot take you anymore. I've seen you save all of us 1,000 times, but each time you did, the collateral damage became bigger and worse. I saw the fear growing stronger, and it led me to make the ultimate sacrifice. I integrated the Emerald Core into the Mark K, transforming this suit from a guardian to an anti-God protocol. It isn't here to kill you, but to contain the impossible and impose the stalemate that allows everybody to survive." The speech hung heavily in the air between the two men, laced with the moral implications of civil war tearing Tony Stark's soul to shreds. His decision to create this anti-God protocol meant breaking lines that no hero should ever cross, giving up the arc reactor's purity for a dangerous radioactive power source that will leave a large portion of the Earth contaminated for centuries to come if containment fails at some point. And Superman's reply came immediately with a violent charge. The Superman's fist connected with the Mark K armor, cracking it open and spewing green radiation vapor in the air like blood. The blow knocked the wind out of Tony Stark and sent the suit into overload as the systems desperately tried to stabilize the overloaded frame, while he responded in kind with point-blank repulsor fire, hammering the Superman back, causing him to fall through the air in a series of weakening afterimages, before crashing into the remnant of a demolished office block, sending up dust clouds mixed with the rain and the expanding green radiation, while Tony Stark remained there, his heart pounding against the containment fields, and sensing the catastrophic consequences of his creation looming larger than ever. If the core breached right now, the resulting release of radiation will render half the city uninhabitable for generations to come. But the genius of Tony Stark was unstoppable now. He began pouring energy into tactical systems, while the nanite swarms morphed into micro-missiles, armed with new chunks of emerald poison that spiraled out in patterns that exploded in the vicinity of the rising Superman, stripping him of more solar armor and drawing painful gasps from his lips. This confrontation was about to break a lot more than stone. It was the final nail in the coffin of the Avenger and the Justice League cooperation, and the trust they'd managed to earn in spite of universal threats. Because of Tony Stark's decision to prepare for that fateful day when God will turn into a destroyer, the Emerald Core pulsed hot with the demand for more energy. While Friday's voice updated the metrics, cellular depletion accelerated recommends full neutralization protocol to avoid regeneration. But Tony Stark hesitated, knowing that the shift in ethics, which led him to this point, in the first place, was now clashing with the reluctant respect he still had for the hero of yesterday, and the battle continued its relentless progression, with both combatants exchanging blows that drained them of their strength, creating an unbearable level of tension, as the mortal and his ingenuity were fighting the divinity and its waning glory, while the Mark K was maneuvering with incredible efficiency and precision thanks to the advanced stabilization system that allowed it to mimic Superman's movements, while the weakening aura was forcing him to fight for every movement, while the rain was turning the battlefield into an incredibly slippery and dangerous surface, and as lightning lit up the two warriors engaged in a primal fight. Tony Stark understood the terrifying scope of his creation as he had to perform one more calculated escalation, one deeper probe into the reserve energy, which will determine whether his high-stakes gamble paid off. Either he will achieve a permanent stalemate that will cage hope itself, or a conflict that will end up devouring everyone in radioactive flames. The core pulsed with lethal potential, daring the confrontation to come to a head as the city burned beneath it and the storm howled, seeming to recoil from the moment that pitted engineering genius against ultimate vulnerability in an inexorable cataclysm that could change the rules of power balance forever. Superman emerged from the crumbling tower like some sort of wounded titan, his form glowing with the ominous emerald sheen that now suffused his whole being. The cape, once immaculate, fluttering tatters as it clung to the shoulders of a man burdened with the unfamiliar weight of fatigue, while Tony Stark in the Mark K let the armor's systems rebalance as the nanotech swarm stitched the latest tear in the chest plating together. Friday's voice delivering another precise report. Core integrity standing at 71%. Radiation bleed now projecting a 20-meter contamination zone. advise immediate de-escalation protocol to prevent civilian exposure threshold from exceeding lethal limits. But Tony ignored the artificial warning, pushing the green furnace even harder, driving more energy into the weakening aura as it constricted itself tightly around Superman like some kind of barbed wire. Eyes that used to be as bright as 1,000 suns now glowing fiercely with defiance and grief as they fixed on the armored man, who dared to defy him in the midst of this carnage, because this was not a fight between allies. It was the ultimate test of faith, shattered by one man's dream of containment, as the rain pelted down relentlessly, transforming the battlefield into an alien wasteland of twisted metal and rising floodwaters, where broken bits of debris from collapsed buildings drifted like relics of a world that no longer believed in its own invincible heroes. And Tony's thoughts were racing in a dizzying whirlwind to the hidden 2026 Forge, where he had spent weeks working on integrating JRVI's successor algorithms in conjunction with radiation sensors specifically tuned to detect and track solar radiation signatures, predicting to the second when the Kryptonian cells would weaken under the onslaught of the green assault. The switch from arc reactor purity to radioactive core having proven to be an even bigger sacrifice for the billionaire than the ethical shift from superhero to planetary overseer, weighed down by whispers about the necessity of the failsafe against an individual who could outpace justice itself. And now, in the middle of this apocalypse, the Mark K's green light repulsors charged with a high-pitched whine and then let loose another concentrated attack, sending Superman spinning backwards in a graceful arc, fighting against the green haze as the micromissiles launched in precise formations, detonating in explosive bursts that shredded off still more of his solar armor, making the next few seconds of his flight stutter as the aerosolized kryptonite dust entered into his system, transforming every breath he took into a fiery battle for oxygen, while lead-lined plates on the armor absorbed his next heat vision blast, molten against the surface before fading harmlessly into the storm, while Tony manipulated the suit precisely, flight stabilizers engaging in an automated process of compensating for each weak counterattack by pulling data from exhaustive combat archives, with the vibranium steel exoskeleton absorbing the next thunderous punch with a bone-shaking impact that left more cracks running through the outer shell of the suit, the core responding immediately, rerouting power to the kinetic shields and surging the weakening aura to new levels to create an apparent emerald corona around Superman, slowing down the Kryptonian god's movements in ways that made him almost seem mortal. The fight stretching on in this deliberate, agonizing slow motion, every hit driving unbearable amounts of emotional tension into his soul as the city began to crumble around him, groaning and bending inward like giant trees in their final moments. While the two fought, in the eye of destruction, every strike, every counter, every cry bearing the weight of broken alliances, as this Mark K, this blend of billionaire tech and cosmic radiation, was not just poisoning the atmosphere, but eroding what remained of the bridge between the Avengers and the Justice League, turning the two into suspicious rivals who saw Tony's suit as the ultimate betrayal, a weapon designed to end the life of the protector of Earth itself. And as lightning flashed overhead in violent white bursts across the ravaged skyline, Tony fired up the external speakers, his voice crackling as he spoke with a sense of desperation he had only known since the beginning of the project. "Clark, damn it, stop fighting me like this. I didn't design this to kill you. I designed it because the world needs to know that there is a safety net if you fail one day. One fear. One moment when everything that you care about gets taken away and destroyed, and the whole system fails. This suit is the safety measure that prevents us all from ending up in hell." And Superman responded with a roar of fury and anguish, connecting a powerful blow to Tony's midsection, one that managed to pierce the outer layer of kinetic defenses, sending a shower of emerald vapor, spraying everywhere in an explosion of blood-like liquid, the force behind it tossing the billionaire into a spiral through the air that flight stabilizers desperately tried to compensate for, while core output surged to the maximum, redirecting any power it could into active combat modes as the nanotech swarm formed a new lattice, launching new waves of nanomissiles, the explosions of kryptonite shrapnel ripping visible reactions from the god as each one tore into his flesh, adding more pain to the growing list. And now the fight was truly becoming primal as they traded blows in a slow-motion symphony of mortal prowess against divine might, with each second stretched into infinity with the weight of dread and regret as the rain mingled with the spreading green haze, casting a ghastly glow across the devastated landscape, turning Metropolis into a radioactive ghost town where the weak sunlight that filtered through the clouds could no longer recharge the Kryptonians' depleted cells, while the full catastrophic potential of the core loomed over them like a bomb waiting to drop, and if it failed here and now, then the ensuing fallout would poison the planet for generations. But the genius in the Mark K was unwilling to give in, flooding more power into the green light emitters to bombard Superman with wave after wave of energy, until each hit started weakening the god further and further, until he was forced to confront the limitations of his own invulnerability. And as the fight pressed on in its relentless pace, both men locked in their deadly dance against the backdrop of the howling storm and crumbling ruins. Mark K hovered above the ground, with its emerald core pulsing with the double meaning of redemption and damnation, while Superman rose again, heavy with the burden of defeat, his gaze filled with the sorrow of a god who had never seen such betrayal amongst those he called his friends. The tension now stretched taut as ever, the emotional subtext as thick as the radiation haze in the air, because now this nightmare of a project had been put to its ultimate test, and the ultimate price of the high-stakes gamble was staring Tony Stark right in the face. The pulse of the core beat faster with every warning of shrinking stability margins as the city continued to burn, silently witnessing as the battle continued, progressing with all the inevitability of a cataclysmic duel threatening to incinerate both opponents in the green fire of an engineered fate. Rising from the flooded crater, Superman moved upwards, boots cracking the pavement that was already shattered, emerald radiation stabbing at his body with thousands of microscopic needles. His invulnerability and limitless strength now weakened until they were nothing but his own stubborn unwillingness to lose as he dragged more and more aerosolized kryptonite into his lungs, filling his chest cavity with a furnace of agonizing pain. Meanwhile, in the Mark K armor, Tony Stark could feel his systems straining from the continuous damage as they worked overtime to repair the damage and seal leaks caused by the toxic plasma leaking through the plates. The vibranium steel suit proved to be the result of unparalleled engineering genius. Yet, as the godlike powers of a man pushed to the breaking point revealed, even Stark could reach his limit against raw power, and the rain, far from ceasing, became stronger, as if the skies themselves were mourning the tragic duel below that pitted two former allies against each other for nothing more than the very soul of the world that stood precariously between their divine duties and mortal fear. Stark's memories took him back to the final phase of the Mark K suit's development in the hidden 2026 laboratory. It was there that he had successfully integrated the core of Emerald technology, creating a stable synthetic kryptonite furnace capable of powering all the suit's functions and maintaining the delicate balance between a deadly aura projection and pilot safety. As Superman roared with centuries of Kryptonian pride behind him, his fist collided with the reinforced Mark K arm, and a new set of shockwaves destroyed another row of ruined buildings above the rising waters. Even as Tony could taste his own blood flowing freely from the cracked lips in the helmet, his suit reacted instantly, and the green light of repulsors burst into concentrated flashes that battered Superman back several meters, while nanotech micromissiles spiraled through the air, exploding in a deadly precision around the hero and embedding new kryptonite pieces in his body. The battle had reached its deepest, most intense phase now, as a deliberately paced war of attrition unfolded before their eyes, stretching time in an attempt to prolong this horrifying spectacle for just a bit longer. In the destroyed cityscape of Metropolis, skyscrapers looked like mere skeletons, highways were flooded, and the streets radiated faintly with scattered radiation particles that would continue to make this place inhospitable for decades if the core ever leaked, making Tony feel the catastrophic weight of the ethical decision he had made. Because while the Mark K was just a suit of containment technology, it marked an undeniable shift in the ethical approach of the scientist who used to build safe and sustainable energy solutions to save the world. Now he would do whatever necessary to keep a planetary ward safe. Friday's voice sounded coldly mechanical in his ears. Solar signature depletion at 48%. Target's vital signs show stress and cellular breakdown. Recommend transition to neutralization protocol before the regeneration window reopens. But Tony hesitated once again as the psychological toll took over, remembering all their shared battles and reluctant laughter, reminding himself that this Mark K was the only tool to contain the man he once trusted and called a friend. The lead-lined plates turned away the desperate heat vision attack of Superman, turning it into harmless red lights, while the suit performed impeccable automated maneuvers to counter supersonic movements of the hero's body, causing the aura around him to grow stronger and tighten further, putting even more pressure on Superman and weakening the endless reserves of energy inside him, in the face of relentless scientific achievement. External speakers one last time, Tony cleared his throat, ready to deliver a message that came straight from the heart. Clark, if you can hear me through all this mess, you know I never wanted to see this happen to you. I've built clean suits, I've built peace, I've built hope. But the world has changed. You have become too dangerous for us to blindly trust anymore. This Mark K and its emerald nightmare aura are the price of our security, the thing that creates stalemate when gods walk among men. The words sounded loud over the whirling wind and rain, hanging between them like a plea as Superman answered with a desperate and visible lunge, striking at the Marquet's helmet with a fist and cracking the visor of his opponent with spiderweb fractures. His spinning body was brought to a halt, however, as the stabilizers of Tony's suit reacted to the blow and launched another sustained repulsor attack, pushing Superman down to create a massive wave of greenish-tinted water in the streets below. Their battle had taken a mythic form now, with two titanic heroes engaged in an agonizing duel that seemed to stretch on forever as the slow pace of the fight gave way to the terrible horror of the situation. Their alliance, the once strong bond between Avengers and Justice League, was broken beyond repair with this one act of mortal rebellion against divinity, while the core pulsated and demanded even more power as the radiation bleed rate grew to 70%. According to Friday's warning, but Tony pushed the suit further, flooding it with all of the energy needed to maintain such high levels of radiation. As the nanotech swarms formed tactical formations, ready to strike and defend with the next inevitable exchange, mixed with the toxic mist, the rain made the battlefield look like some kind of hellish painting, and, as the light of lightning struck the darkened sky, once again, revealing the figures of the two superheroes locked in combat. Amidst the destruction, Tony could feel the true horror of his creation. This kryptonite-powered masterpiece, capable of containing the unstoppable and saving humanity, at the same time, could just be what ignites the final war between gods and mortals, leaving only radioactive ruins and questions about whether genius has saved the world, or doomed it by bleeding the legend dry. The tension escalated to unbearable levels. The slow and deliberate dance of death and desperation continued as the emerald heart of the Mark K beat louder, tempting the Man of Steel to give everything he had left. It was understood that one final showdown would determine the fate of trust, hope, and the precarious balance between mortals and the superhuman once and for all. Superman emerged from the glowing floodwaters, reborn in a broken form that resembled a god gone mad with rage. His body was dripping streams of radioactive waters that hissed as they slid down his skin due to the continuous effects of kryptonite dust poisoning him from the inside as each cell waged a war that was never meant to be won. While Tony Stark saw how the Mark K's systems screamed on the edge of tolerance as the nanotech lattice tried to cope with the growing levels of radiation bleed that turned the entire battlefield into toxic green mist. The vibranium steel exoskeleton groaned from the cumulative strain of godlike hits, but did not crumble as this armor represented the highest level of mortal defiance, an embodiment of engineering brilliance and forbidden cosmic powers that had cost Stark more than his sleepless nights, as his soul was slowly but surely becoming corroded from within. With each passing moment due to the ethical shift from being a respected superhero to being viewed as a warden, hovering above the submerged streets, watching the Man of Steel rise, moving slowly and heavily, as if each step required immense willpower, Tony saw how the hero's eyes were no longer bright with the glory of the sun, but rather dull and full of sadness, as if they weighed more than any mortal soul. This sadness and sorrow was clearly visible even above the storm clouds as rain fell mercilessly, blending with the expanding green mist that wrapped itself around Superman and drained him of all solar energy. And Tony relived the endgame simulations in his head, which he ran in the underground forge, where he calculated all the possible outcomes of this confrontation. Predictions of the JRVI's successor algorithms showed that prolonged exposure could force a permanent stalemate if the core held, or lead to total neutralization if pushed too far past the safety thresholds. As the two titans circled each other once again, hovering above the destroyed city, The flight. Stabilizers hummed predictively, matching Superman's every labored surge before it started. As green light repulsors charged and unleashed sustained bursts, which pushed the hero backward through crumbling skyscrapers in slow cascades of falling debris that rose like a funeral smoke. Tony felt the psychological pressure tightens its grip around his heart, as he knew that this was Clark Kent, a man who was loved by billions as he embodied hope, and now reduced to stumbling under the weight of the mortal fear he created himself. Lead-lined plating absorbed another heat vision attack which turned the beam that used to be a weapon into a weak and powerless glow that fizzled harmlessly against the reinforced surfaces. Nanotech micro-missiles spun out in deadly formations, targeting Superman, and blowing up with calculated precision around his frame. As explosions released additional particles of kryptonite that scorched his flesh and increased the cellular depletion process, Friday's voice sounded cold and analytical inside the helmet. Core stability, 64%. Radiation contamination zone expanding. Recommend full neutralization sequence. Yet, Tony's finger hovered over the command button as the Civil War was raging inside him to its peak. Because to accomplish this mission would mean breaking the remaining trust between the Avengers and the Justice League forever, labeling him as a man who caged a god. The external speakers switched on as Tony spoke brokenly with the despair weighing his tone. Clark, if you're still in there somewhere, hear me. I never wanted to be the one who holds the chain. I built this suit because the world pleaded with me for protection from what you might have become, not from whom you are. But one day that line blurs, and when it does, someone has to be ready. This Mark K is that readiness, the thing that allows hope to live without making it dangerous. Prayer. As Superman gave a roar that sent tremors throughout the remaining buildings and rushed forward with a desperate final charge. Although he moved slower than before, he was now powered by the spirit of the Kryptonian warrior who refused to be tamed. Superman struck the Mark K's core housing with a forceful punch, breaching the outer containment layer, causing the armor to unleash an explosive spray of emerald energy. The shockwave hurled Tony backwards through the air, the suit spinning erratically as alarms blared and stabilizers struggled desperately to get control over it, while the synthetic kryptonite furnace spiked into overdrive, rerouting all available watts into emergency shields and retaliatory systems. The Mark K countered with a point-blank barrage of green light attacks that slammed Superman back down into the waterlogged street, creating a large glowing crater where water boiled and debris was instantly vaporized. It was the agonizing slow-motion crescendo of the battle as the once proud city of Metropolis lay dying around the two battling titans, reducing itself to radioactive ruin that would scar the Earth for centuries. The tension was at its highest level, and the weakening aura put tremendous pressure on the Man of Steel, forcing his formerly effortless godlike power to act through labored and strained movements of someone who truly felt their vulnerability for the first time. The rain was falling mercilessly, mixing with toxic green mist, turning the entire battlefield into a nightmare realm where the solar energy barely managed to penetrate Superman's weakened cells. The Mark K hovers above the large glowing crater of destruction, with its core flickering with unstable green light, as Friday reported on 58% stability and rising core temperature. Nevertheless, Tony continues to press forward, flooding tactical systems with power as nanotech swarms reformed into one last offensive formation, prepared to deliver a blow that would end this confrontation. Because now this confrontation had taken the shape of a slowly escalating disaster, threatening to forever change the balance of power between mankind and gods. The weight of this decision crushed down on his mind as he looked at the weakened Man of Steel rising from the glowing water, shoulders sagging and breathing harsh, but with those eyes full of defiant sorrow, and the tension tightened as tight as it would get, with its deliberate and slow pace giving room for every bit of regret, betrayal, and desperation. Because this emerald-formed masterpiece, the Kryptonite-powered Mark K armor, was now approaching its destiny, and only one more calculated strike, one last exchange was needed for the high-stakes gamble to be resolved. That even the greatest minds in the world could not shield themselves from the cost of containing a god hung in the radioactive air like a sentence of death, as Superman slowly regained his footing within the bubbling, burning crater. His once indestructible frame now merely the outline of a figure of resistance against the toxic emeralds that had begun to take over the flooded remains of Metropolis, the man's chest heaving with ragged breaths, each one sucking more of the kryptonite into his system, while Tony Stark within the Mark K felt the suit's core flare up with unstable anger as the nanotech swarms fought to seal up the breaches, the alarms screaming through the suit, and Friday delivering the final grim assessment, core stability at 53%, radiation bleed now at catastrophic levels. Full neutralization sequence is the only possible option available. But Tony's hands trembled against the controls. For this moment, this climax after months of work on the suit represented everything he had sacrificed. The time in isolation in 2026, where he had designed the integration with the Emerald Core. A creation meant as a final weapon of war against Kryptonian divinity, not born out of vengeance, but out of necessity. For even he saw that hope had too much potential to wipe humanity out in one single burst of divine strength. Yet the psychological weight of the ethical shift weighed him down, making him feel the weight of every sacrifice he had made for humanity's sake, especially now as Superman rose from the remains of his former glory, now moving more slowly, labored and weakened with every passing second as the invisible aura sucked every trace of sunlight from his veins, leaving him more mortal than godlike in the pouring rain that hissed through the toxic mist that now surrounded him. The fight had taken on a new quality, a slow and deliberate dance where every move was meticulously planned out and executed. The hero and villain facing off against each other in the drowned remains of Metropolis that was barely recognizable to either of them as the gleaming, hopeful beacon it had been before the storm, with the sun unable to penetrate the fog created by the rain. The flight stabilizers within the suit hummed in desperation as the system attempted to preemptively cancel out the hero's attacks, and then launched an attack of its own, charging the green light repulsors with a growl before unleashing a series of barrages upon the hero, blasting him backwards through the waters of the flooded district and carving out a slow trench of boiling vapor and shattered concrete in the hero's wake. The force of impact shook through the air, causing more skyscrapers to collapse into skeletal piles and sending a shockwave through the air. The crumbling buildings sounding like a death knell to every promise of friendship and alliance that the two sides had once held, as Tony felt the pressure build in his stomach, like the blade of a knife. For this wasn't a victory. This was the shattering of legends. This was the culmination of the moral civil war that had raged throughout the billionaire's lifetime and now reached its climactic point, as the suit's speakers crackled to life with one final message, the voice trembling and broken. "Clark, if you can hear me through the pain, know that I never stopped seeing you as the hero you are, but the world can't survive on hope alone. When hope has the capacity to destroy, this Mark K, this emerald cage, is the price we both have to pay for billions to remain safe." The words dissolved into the storm, and Superman responded with a roar that carried more effort than usual as he lunged towards the villain, his fist connecting with the armored suit and finally managing to pierce its outer kinetic layers. This resulted in a violent burst of emeralds before Tony was blasted into a free fall through the toxic rain, the suit's systems flaring up into alarm as they tried to gain back control as the kryptonite furnace flared into action and powered all of the suit's defensive mechanisms. In response, Tony managed to launch one last attack before the suit's systems went offline, firing another point-blank volley of emeralds from the green lights, followed by a nanotech swarm attack that hit the hero, blasting apart his solar armor until he fell to his knees in the floodwater. The fight had now reached its most agonizing point, becoming more like a scene straight out of a nightmare with every passing second that dragged by in heart-wrenching despair, with the two titans of the world facing off against each other, the one in an armor forged from fear and the other kneeling in defeat. The weakening aura weighed down on the Man of Steel, causing his breaths to become shallow and pained, with the Mark K hovering above the emeralds, its core glowing with a deadly emerald hue as the two men waited for the other to make a move. The rain continued to pour, mingling with the spreading mist that now enveloped the entire battlefield and made it appear as a glowing monument of the cost of containing the hero, as the lead-lined surface of the suit gave off a glow as it successfully defended against Superman's heat vision attacks. The full magnitude of what Tony had accomplished hit him then, for if the core failed now, the radioactive waste would contaminate the planet for centuries to come. Yet if it worked, this would create a permanent stalemate. a weapon that would trap Kryptonians in a permanent prison without destroying them as a species. As lightning split the skies, revealing the figures of the two men in a stark, freezing picture, the advanced algorithms designed by the successor of JRVIS processed the information in real time, displaying vital statistics to Tony, informing him that solar radiation signature was at critical low, resulting in halting of cellular regeneration. Immediate containment lockdown was required to achieve objective. As the alliance between the Avengers and the Justice League disintegrated, forever altered by the single stroke of genius, Tony thought back to the design process of the suit, from the vibranium steel exoskeleton to the aerosol countermeasures and predictive flight patterns. Everything had been done to ensure that this moment became the pinnacle of their fight. As he stared into Superman's eyes, which were now dim, though the unshakable spark of hope remained there, and Superman looked back through the cracked visor at the villain, as if communicating through a silent question. Tony realized that this confrontation, this clash of brilliant engineering and cosmic vulnerability, had already changed everything, as the tension reached its highest point due to the slow, deliberate pacing that allowed every emotion to sink in. The fate of the Emerald Heart in the Mark K hung in the balance. One final command from Tony, one last surge of energy, and the suit would either go into neutralization mode or trigger the cataclysm that consumed both of them in emeralds. The storm seemed to rage on as the universe held its breath until this choice was made, and with it would come a new power balance between humans and gods. Superman was down on his knees amidst the emerald glowing water, his colossal form trembling under the weight of the weakened aura that had slowly but surely taken away every last shred of solar power and left nothing but the frailty of a former god of truth and valor. His breathing was shallow and ragged, as every inhalation brought more kryptonite into his body, turning him into a man whose blood flowed like a fire that would not be quenched. Tony Stark, hovering over him in the Mark K armor suit, was working it hard, pushing every single function to its limit. The swarms of nanobots inside his suit were struggling to contain the radiation bleed, turning everything in sight into an emerald hellscape. The vibranium steel exoskeleton was riddled with cracks and scars from numerous godlike impacts it had taken from the man below, and was still standing testament to that year of forbidden engineering. The ethical change that had made Tony Stark into a global enforcer weighed heavily on his mind and soul, as it was heavier than this armor itself, since that particular moment was the end result of the technical solutions and decisions that had led him here: the integration of synthetic kryptonite furnace, the sensors tuned to identify solar signatures, and the aerosols capable of counteracting the effects of the emerald substance, as well as the kinetic shielding, were now put to use in this epic clash that was destroying the world beneath their feet. Completely immersed in radioactive destruction, with skyscrapers turned into tombstones, highway roads buried beneath the glowing water, and the barely visible sunlight from the storm, clouds useless as a weapon against the emerald poison that prevented any kind of cellular rejuvenation, Friday's voice was cut through the helmet as a final call for help: core stability at 48% radiation contamination. Now citywide suggest immediate implementation of the lockdown protocol to ensure permanent stalemate before core breach occurs, causing extinction-level radiation fallout. But Tony's finger remained frozen on the command as the psychological pressure cut deeper than the actual one, since he was looking at Superman, the hero that had saved thousands of worlds, and now was reduced to this image of defiant sorrow, his eyes lifting up through the rain and mist, to look at Tony through the cracks in the visor of his helmet, with a silent accusation that cut sharper than any heat vision ever could. The external speakers clicked once again, and then Tony's voice emerged in a broken rasp with every emotion he had experienced on this journey. Clark, you have to understand, I never wanted this to be how things end. I created arc reactors for light. I created suits for peace. But the day came when hope needed a cage, when the god everyone counted on became a threat to humanity, and no one else could stop him. The Mark K is the price of tomorrow, and with that statement dissolving in the howling winds of this apocalypse. As Superman slowly struggled to rise, his steps heavy, with the effort of overcoming these chains that had taken away his infinite power, the rain falling in torrents, with the toxic mist turning everything in a shining glow surrounding the two figures, in an ethereal, slow-motion portrait of necessity and betrayal. As the stabilization flight systems of the Mark K hummed with anticipatory precision and green light repulsors, charged with a powerful resonant noise that reverberated through the city, Tony was preparing for the last clash of epic proportions as he tried to predict the hero's moves, and as the Mark K lead-lined plating gave off a weak glow reflecting another futile attempt at heat vision that died out in harmless vapor. The nanotechnology had formed the protective offensive lattice of micro-missiles, ready to deliver the final blow and decide whether they would create permanent stalemate or push the unstable core past the point of no return. And in that very instant, the battle reached its peak, making time seem to move slower. It was like a painting of the moral civil war inside Tony, who reached the ultimate breaking point since, by implementing this protocol and thus ensuring permanent stalemate, he would seal himself for good as a man that caged a god and irreversibly fracture both Avengers and Justice League. While on the other hand, not doing anything would mean the inevitable destruction of humanity at the hands of the god they all revered, the Emerald Core pulsing in unstable fury with every data stream being processed. Friday's voice continued. With the report cellular depletion at 92%, solar recharge nullified, objective within reach, but stability margins crumbling, and Tony still hesitated as the rain poured ruthlessly through the radioactive cloud, transforming the glowing water to a mirror reflecting the figures of two titans as the weakened aura pressed down with the force of its finality, bringing down Superman's shoulders and making his breath come in tortured gasps of a god facing the limits of his divine legend, and the man in Mark K's suit, feeling the weight of his invention that now took over its former function as a mere armor, transforming it into an item that decided fate of trust and power balance between mankind and the Superman. Just another deliberate escalation of this epic battle, and one final surge would bring a decision to a close, with Tony's heart beating fast with anticipation of this crucial move in that very moment that slowed down and allowed the pain and sorrow of regret, necessity, and betrayed hopes of a hero to saturate the emerald glow of this radioactive ruins, since that particular emerald core now sat right on the edge of destiny. The storm still raged on as if the heavens themselves were horrified at this decision that would determine whether they would lock the son of Krypton in a radioactive embrace forever, or ignite the apocalypse that would consume both of them in green fire and broken hopes. The world seemed to hang with the two figures in their frozen stance, waiting for the final clash that would determine their future and the fate of humanity. The two figures stood frozen like that in a suspended heartbeats, with the world standing still along with them, as the radioactive haze became thicker and the core pulsing louder with each passing moment, in a challenge that would bring everything to the ultimate showdown. Superman stood fully erect now, a monument to broken divinity, every shake of his shoulders and every shallow gasp exposing the long and agonizing victory of mortal ingenuity over Kryptonian superiority, with the emerald aura thick enough to create a prison of pain around the Man of Steel, slowly draining away whatever was left of his solar-powered fire. And Tony Stark in his Mark K armor felt the system of the Mark K struggling to hold back under its limits, its nanotech swarms glowing intermittently, trying to fix whatever damage had been inflicted on its layers, its vibranium steel skeleton scarred by the blows of godlike energy. The storm had not yet stopped, hissing its judgmental condemnation on the glowing floodwaters that had inundated the remains of Metropolis, the city now buried and drowning in its radioactive grave, where flickering glimmers of daylight were struggling to make any sort of difference to this toxic environment. The thoughts inside Tony's head ran rampant, with calculations and plans coming from the 2026 Forge, where thousands of endgame strategies were run and found to prove that the current confrontation was either meant to establish a permanent stalemate or trigger the core breaching, which would poison the entire globe. JARVIS. Successors screeched data into his helmet with warnings such as solar signatures approaching critical zero, cellular integrity failing, immediate full lockdown protocol required to contain objective until stability falls below 40%. But Tony could not pull his finger to initiate the process, since the psychological toll had become too much to bear inside his chest. Because this was now no longer about power or fear. This was the end of the long, brutal road of moral civil war, defining his soul and its absolute apex. As he stared at Superman, the hero whose eyes still smoldered with the mix of despair and determination, and who now silently pleaded with him The sound of the storm raging around them did not compare to the pain inside his chest. Through the external speakers, the static noise broke up, and he heard his own voice whisper brokenly, the accumulation of everything he felt and saw from his friend in the past decade. "Clark, you've suffered and fought for longer than any being ever should have to do so. This isn't the end of you. It's the end of this illusion of you. That one man, one God is capable of carrying the burden of the world forever and always. The Mark K or the Emerald Cage is what protects all of us from all of us." These were the words that echoed in this toxic atmosphere of death and defeat. As Superman stepped forward deliberately with his labored steps through the glowing floodwaters, breaking with each other through the submerged pavement, moving despite the pressure of emerald aura that made the infinite power he possessed vulnerable and mortal. The flight stabilizers in Mark K buzzed with exhaustion, calculating his next move and getting prepared for the impending burst of energy, with green repulsors charging quietly like a beast ready to explode, resonating their low growls through the glowing floodwaters, while nanotech missiles were forming one more last formation of a final assault, ready to deliver a blow that would contain the core. A last heat vision attempt by Superman failed, leaving a brief but barely noticeable warm glow fading away, and as the battle entered into its most agonizing and dramatic slow-motion finale, the two titans stood opposite to each other across the glowing gap of radioactive waters, one being protected by mortal fear and the other broken by the very thing he used to defy. While skyscrapers of the ruined city began to collapse inwards, bringing down new showers of debris into the toxic waters, the once glorious alliance between Avengers and Justice League had become irreversibly ruined, poisoned by this act of containment that tried to confine hope into chains of fear, while Emerald Core throbbed desperately in unsteady movements, receiving a critical update, warning Friday of stability dropping at 39% and planetary radiation threat level increasing. The heart of the inventor pounded against the core containment field, feeling the full impact of his creation, for either complete this procedure and brand himself as the villain, executing the protector of the people, or refuse to do it and get the entire planet endangered with God who had lost control. As the rains kept pouring down endlessly, and the mist growing thicker in an attempt to turn the battlefield into a glowing inferno, every moment now stretched to eternity of unbearable anticipation and inevitability, and every breath becoming harder to take, Superman lifted up his fist for the last time, shaking with effort, and as the motion became so slow and so deliberate, the whole world seemed to pause in anticipation and watch the last defiance of a legend being broken by mortal technology. Knowing that this fusion of billionaire technology and cosmic debris had reached its highest point of tension, Tony observed him with a cracked visor while the Emerald Core throbbed with unstable fury, daring to ignite either a permanent stalemate which would contain Superman inside those unbreakable radioactive chains forever, or unleash a cataclysm which would kill them both in the green flames. The static of the frozen tableau came crashing down at last when Tony Stark finally pressed the command. The Emerald Core of the Mark K pulsed with one final cataclysmic surge of energy that surged through the entire complex with deadly precision. The green light of the repulsors unleashed a relentless barrage of energy that enveloped Superman in a blinding corona of kryptonite radiation, while the swarms of nanotech converged like a living storm cloud of microscopic chains that burrowed deep within the hero's skin and rendered him permanently inactive. The Man of Steel let loose a final defiant cry that echoed through the radioactive landscape of Metropolis, the sheer weight of which made the flooded foundations tremble and crack one more time before his huge form toppled forward into the glowing floodwaters, with his body thrashing violently under the crushing weight of the containment protocol that had been engineered especially for this moment. The weakening aura of energy intensified and reached its peak, causing the godlike figure to become trapped in a living prison of vulnerability. Each of his breaths a desperate struggle for survival as the artificial kryptonite furnace stabilized at the crucial threshold, thus creating a permanent stalemate rather than annihilating Superman outright as he had done with the original Mark K during the moral civil war, because Tony preferred containment over destruction despite its heavy toll on his conscience. The overloaded systems of the suit shrieked out the confirmation of the completion of his mission Friday, announcing the completion of the objective. The solar radiation signatures were nullified. Cellular regeneration was halted indefinitely. Core stability recovered to 32%. However, radiation zone is now locked. In exclusion mode at the citywide level, the rain continued to fall with its relentless onslaught, combining with the thick mist of toxic emissions that shrouded the drowned grounds of the fallen beacon of hope, making the whole battlefield glow with an emerald haze that served as a testament to the great sacrifice made by mortals when facing gods. Tony Stark hovered there, inside the damaged Mark K, his heart pounding against the containment fields as the wave of catastrophic consequences washed over him. The entire city lay devastated in ruins, skyscrapers left reduced to mere silhouettes, highways sunk underwater, and the faint rays of sunlight piercing through the storm clouds forever blocked by the thick barrier of mist surrounding Superman, whose torn cape fluttered uselessly around him like a broken flag of surrender. The psychological impact that had been growing throughout the process of this engineered nightmare was about to reach its peak as Tony faced the ultimate reality that the one who was once called his friend, the man who embodied everything he ever believed in, was now imprisoned in a chain of mortal fear and necessity, thus rendering any kind of cooperation between the Avengers and the Justice League impossible, and poisoning this bond forever. The external speakers crackled and emitted their last weak transmission, Tony's voice coming out as a hollow whisper with the weight of all the compromises that he had to make over every sleepless night spent inside the Forge of 2026. Clark, if you're still conscious in there, then understand that this isn't the end of hope, but the beginning of a world where gods have limits too, and where men can finally sleep without fear of their sky falling on their heads. I built this, Mark K, to save us all. Even from you, the words faded into the howling wind as Superman slowly lifted his head up one final time, with a look of sheer exhaustion and profound despair in his eyes, before locking gazes with the armored figure hovering above him with a silent acknowledgement of betrayal, followed by the collapse of his body into the glowing waters of the flooded streets, where he was held in suspended stasis by the emerald aura that surrounded him like a prison. Tony felt the systems of the suit begin their shutdown procedure. The nanotech repaired whatever it could. The core stabilized to a safe containment level, and the flight stabilizers of the Mark K slowly lowered it to rest upon the ground. Amidst the ruins, the genius in the helmet stared at the fallen hero with a strange blend of pride and remorse, because although this was his greatest achievement in engineering a true masterpiece of anti-God protocol, it also marked the death of the most important thing he ever had the trust of his allies broken, the city poisoned, and the legacy of Iron Man forever tarnished as the man who built the ultimate anti-God protocol. The storm eased its rage just a little bit, as if the heavens themselves had seen enough, turning the rain into a steady drizzle that combined with the glowing mist, producing an unearthly haze over the devastated skyline, lit up faintly by the emergency lights coming from distant, untouched districts. Observing the birth of a new age, Tony Stark stood there alone in the toxic wasteland as the emerald radiance of the Mark K cast long shadows over the floodwaters, while Friday calmly updated the status. Containment protocol is active, target neutralized without termination, mission completed. And yet there was no joy left in the billionaire genius's heart, only the grim acceptance that this confrontation, this slow apocalypse created by necessity, had changed everything forever, and that the delicate balance between the hero and Warden had been irreversibly blurred.